So I am here with Erick Mertz, author Erick Mertz, and I made a list before we talked of all the full-time writers that I know, and I put them in alphabetical order.
Okay.
And you were the only one on that list.
Really?
And then
There's nobody
I
named Alan or
the
nobody named.
there's full-time writer, you were it. Now,
Oh no.
full-time writer that's been doing it for 10 years, we're going to talk about that. That's a second list. You are it. And when I say that, I want to say you're not a trust fund kid that whose wife works, who sold some stocks and now can sit back in your gazebo and write. You make a living, a full-time living writing.
Doing
And
this. Yep.
I've been doing this 20 years and you were it. You are the guy. And I've shared with you over the last couple of years, there's some days when I'm going, crap, if Erick can do this, I can do this. You're very inspirational that way. So let's
Oh,
start.
thank you.
Tell us the story about the watch. Let's start there.
Oh boy, where do I start with the watch? So I left my day job in June of my last day job, June of 2023 or 2013. And I got to this kind of I got started with like I had a couple of contracts, I had a couple of jobs, and I just like, all right, if I can make it a year, all right, if I can make it 2 years. It just there was never, like you said, there was never just this thing to fall back on that made it. It always had to work. The train had to keep running,
Mhm.
and it was 10 years of reinventing, the train, how the train ran. And it got to a place where I said, like, you know what, like, if I'm going to get that 10-year watch, I'm just going to, that's what people get in day jobs. They get like a token from the boss
Mhm.
that says, thank you for your service. And I said, I'm going to do it. I'm getting that watch. And so I kind of about, I don't know, a few years in, maybe halfway through that 10 years, I said, all right, if I make it to 10, I'm going to get myself a watch. And I bought a watch. Well, watch has a funny story. I bought the watch, and it showed up about 2 or 3 weeks before the actual anniversary. But I'm not going to take it out of the box until the actual 10-year
Mhm.
anniversary, because you never know what's going to happen between May 25th and
Right.
June 13th, because it's not 10 years until the 13th. Anybody who celebrates an anniversary prematurely, it's the kiss of death. So I gave it to my son, who I think was, I don't know, he's probably 8, 9 at the time, and said, when on June 13th, you can give me this watch. And that'll be 10 years. And so I gave it to him, and he was really excited about it. And he's like, that morning he kind of came out with it. And I mean, and I got it. My boss got me a watch for 10 years as a freelancer. And yeah, yeah.
And just to emphasize, I mean, you're a middle class guy. You're making a decent living. You just bought your second house. You're married. You've got
Yep.
a young son. So it's not like, you've streamlined and you're living, in an apartment above your uncle's garage. I mean, you're
No.
living in you and 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 that's so amazing, and that's so incredible that you're doing this. And I just like I said, I keep going back. I've known you for a few years,
Yep.
and I whenever I say, well, nobody can do it. Well, Erick's doing it. Erick's doing it. So give me the worst day and give me the best day of being a full-time writer.
Oh boy. You should have given me these questions beforehand.
That's all right. You're good at
No,
this.
no. I think the worst day is, look, I said it a moment ago, like you're making it up as you go along all the time. And you kind of get by on you have to have some gut, right? You've got to just deal with it. You've got to deal with the emails that don't get where there's no response. You've got to be able to deal with the client that pulls the rug out from under you. Sometimes, and I can deal with those things. I always feel like, right, whatever, like another client will come along. I can deal with changing expectations. Like you said, I've got a kid, I'm married, changing expectations are part of life. The worst days are when I just have that little crisis of faith that says, like, is this part of something bigger? It's just the worst day, just when all that stuff comes and I can't get up the the gumption to and it happens. I mean, I won't
Hmm.
lie. Like it happened a couple of days ago when I just, I was looking at my list of marketing things to do. My marketer gave me a big checklist and they were all very reasonable, but I looked at it and just said, gosh, more of this, like more of this. But today I looked at that list before we got on here and I said, great, these are the things I got to do. These are the next things. So the worst days are just you lose that little bit of faith. You lose that momentary faith. Um, I'll tell you the best day is any day that those relationships that you work to create, that you cultivate, um, whenever you get that sort of affirmation that they are cultivating the relationship the same way that you are. And what I mean by that is I put value in the friendships, I in the connection we've made. Like I put a lot of value in that. The people that I meet who are potential collaborators, the people I meet who are potential, you know, business connections. Not to use like a generic business term, but I put a lot of value in that. And when I get that feeling like, oh, you're valuing me too, like you look at
Hmm.
me the same way I look at you, and we may do this dance together. I mean, those are the best days, right? Because I think this is a hard business for everybody, and I don't think enough people talk about that. I think it's a hard business for the client because they don't know what to believe in. They don't know if the guy who they're going to hire is the right one or the lady who's pitching them as an editor. They don't know. I mean, everybody wants that feeling of validation, and I feel like if I can create relationships that validate my values in this business and are validating their values in this business, then we're going to extend that to everyone else in
Right.
in that ecosystem. So I like that alignment, and I kind of dance out of my office on the days when I feel that alignment.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
I don't mean to puff you up, but you and I have had this conversation before, and I think what's really interesting about you is you know a lot of writers. I know writers. Writers can be. I've always joked if you're on a ship and the ship is going down,
Oh,
and you've got one side of the lifeboats for the plumbers and one side is the lifeboat for the writers. Get on the plumber side
get on the plumber
because
boat. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
because writers tend to be they're huge egos. I mean, it's writers, actors, performers, musicians, they all have that. The one thing that's really interesting about you, and I'm trying to connect because you're the only person I know that's been doing it full time and successfully, is you have pride. You don't have an ego, or I haven't seen an ego. You have pride. You have sense of ownership. But there's no need to put that. You like being involved in it, but I think that's a big. Do you think that's a big part of the reason you've lasted so long is because you're not putting that ego first?
I would say I would say so. I think there's so many the bad days outnumber the good sometimes, and I think that, well, I guess better put, I think that if you go into this valuing your talent,
Mm,
then you're a dime a dozen, because I think
right.
there's more talented writers on that boat than and there's more talented writers on that boat than not. I think, and so then you have to respect the fact that like what makes success isn't the talent. It is to an extent, right? You have to be good. That's going to come out. But if and that's where we put our ego into, right? It's like, I'm talented. I can do this. Yeah, I can write that story. Like that's the ego talking to me. And I know that everybody else who applied for that same job can write that story too. I'm
Right.
fairly sure of it. So it has to be something else. And so, yeah, I think when just by removing the fact that my talent, my unique vision, my ability to do this thing is what matters. Once I remove that, then it's just a matter of rapport. And sometimes you have to accept that the girl you want to dance with doesn't want to dance with you. And, then you move on. You just don't leave the dance. That's the
Right.
key. You stay there.
I recently reread some Kurt Vonnegut, And there's a Kurt Vonnegut character. I cannot remember his first name. Trout is his last name. And
Kilgore.
he's Kilgore Trout. So there's one thing that Kilgore Trout did that I remember 20 years ago reading and going, that's the dumbest thing in the world. So he would write these like short stories and then he'd put it in an envelope and he'd walk to the garbage can and he'd pretend he's presenting it to the editor and he'd throw it away and he'd go write another one. And I think you that is the silliest, stupidest thing. Well, now as an older guy, I get that. I
Yeah. Oh yeah.
completely get that.
Yeah. Yeah. I have something I do I don't know, maybe one or two times a week, maybe if it's a good week, probably three, where I just write something that has nothing to do with anything. It's not something I'm going to try to self-publish or send to an editor, or it's not for a client. It's just a completely worthless
Yeah.
story. Not worthless, right? It has no upward mobility value, but it's the value of like I can still just write something that makes me laugh or makes me I don't know, whatever I need to feel when I'm doing it. And then I just toss it. I usually just toss the pages. And
Right.
that's it's freeing, right? It's totally freeing to just let it go. Because the longer you hold on to it, the more miserable you're gonna be.
Right. And you're writing it for you.
Yeah.
You're writing
Yeah.
it completely for you. Yeah.
And it's not in it's not in the end result either. It's just in that like I'm just sitting here, I've got 15 minutes to kill, waiting to pick my kid up from Cub Scouts, and I'm just going to write a scene. I'm going to write the scene I'm in. I'm going to write something silly about, a giraffe in a shower. I don't know. Like
Right.
I'm just going to do something silly and it feels good, and then that's it. It's just for fun.
I think I shared this with you. I did a conference call a while ago with a group in a prison
Mm,
that were I think I told you about this. They took a book that I wrote and they were using that to learn how to write fiction. And what amazed me is the questions that I got asked are not the ones that you get asked when you talk to other writers. You get when you talk to other writers at the library or someone else, you get asked, how do I get an agent? How do I get a publisher? What's my
right,
first advance? How do I get it made into a movie? You get those basic
right,
questions. These guys, these guys said, hey, let me read this paragraph to you. Tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what's missing here. How can I make this better? And I really when you isolate and you just put bars and windows on here, they want to do just what you just said. They're writing something completely for them. It's never going to get out, so they just want to make it as
right.
great as it can be.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I've corresponded with prisoners before, and it's so much about the story
Yeah,
because that's what you have when you're in that situation. You've got a story and you want it to feel right.
yeah,
I wish
interesting.
more writers knew that. I wish more writers understood that it's that other stuff happens, but it's less about it's not on the page. It's not when you're sitting there doing the work. That's when that magic of finding an agent, editor, publisher, it that the mad this is the creative art. This is the magic. And then that other stuff that happens later.
Well, what's funny about that too is if you think about everyone you know, right? Everyone in your little bubble, and think about how many people you know that would love to be a movie star. How many people would love to be a full-time magician, a musician? How many people would love to be a full-time writer? How many would love to be a director? You're thinking, you go, oh, Bill would he would kill to be, to be singing. He would kill by so you've got this, but that these people. Now think about how many people would want to be a full-time leather worker or a
Hmm.
full-time potter or a full-time puppeteer. It's smaller. It's we have to go. I don't know anyone that would want to be a full-time puppeteer, but we all know people that want to be movie stars. We all know people that
Right.
would love to be musicians, would love to be rock stars. So part of that, not all of it, part of it is, we have put these ego labels on writer and magician and actor and instead
Right.
of puppeteer and Marriott worker and potter,
Right. I
because
don't think
otherwise the numbers would be the same.
right. I it and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but like this is a blue collar job. This is, I mean, I don't dig ditches
Hmm.
every day, and I'm grateful for that. But I always find like when I sit down at the bar and I'm just talking to people, like, and I listen to people talk about the day in and day out of working at on the road crew, or they're working at in a warehouse. It's like this is a little more like that than this like ivory tower vision that people have. I
Right.
mean, it's mental and emotional labor where that's physical, but I've always said if I can put a blue collar value on what I do, then I'm not going to get that ivory tower bit isn't. I tell people I make things up.
Right.
I get paid to sit around and make things up. Um, and that's not, I mean, that comes after at practice, just like that carpenter spends what, how many years becoming a master carpenter, or a plumber who is, who's on the other side of the boat that I'm getting on. Like that
Right.
person spent a lot of time learning how the whole thing works. And that's the same thing you and I do, is we've learned how story works and character works, and we've added a little business ruffle to it. And that's the difference. And so I don't know. I think this is more blue collar than this, like, I'm not this idea. We were talking about this at dinner on a bunch of kids were over on Sunday, and everyone was talking about what they wanted to be. And, the adults said, well, this is what I had wanted to be. And this is what I do. And for me, like, this was always what I was going to do and wanted to do. And this was always going to be what I did. Can't really do anything else. But everybody was like, the kids were like, oh, well, how do you, like, you must be so lucky, you must be so lucky. I'm like, no, it's no different than, your dad who does this and your mom who does that. It's no different. It's work, it's labor, it's the work and sweat and dealing with failure that moves you to a place where you can do it.
But I think part of that, and I can't get my mind around, is it the fact that you have your ego in that you have the ideal focus of the fact that it's a blue collar job, which is brilliant, that you've got it, that has made you successful, or are you during the path of success that happened? Which one is it?
It's always been that way.
Okay.
I I think it's always been like, my dad was an engineer. My dad was the engineer in the office that he was the engineer that related to the guys in the shop. So he would be the guy that would, untuck his shirt and go out into the shop and then roll his sleeves up and show the guys
Right.
what he had designed. And I would go to work with him a lot in the summer, but in the winter, when school was in, we'd go on the weekends, and that was just always my dad's job. You'd have these three guys sitting in the office drinking coffee, playing darts, trying to figure out how something worked, and then they would send my dad into the shop, and then he would translate it to him. And I don't know, I just always related to that idea that, like, you have to, like, you can't sort of exist in one to be successful. For me, you can't exist in one side of yourself or not. You don't earn the privilege to sit in that office and drink coffee
Mm,
and play darts. You actually earn the privilege to be both. That makes you more valuable. And as I went through college, I just heard a lot, I'd hear people like 19 and 20-year-olds talking about, like, what they're going to do to become this thing. And I thought, like, I don't know, it just never sounded like school was the path. It always sounded like work was the path.
mm.
Like, sitting around talking to people, getting to know people, that's a labor of love, and you have to do it. And that's how you get to be a writer. So when Stephen King says that, like, talks a lot about the sweat he leaves on a page, and he's always pitted against these sort of, I don't want to call George R. R. Martin like an ivory tower writer, but he's an
Hmm.
inspiration guy. He's like, I don't have the inspiration, I can't write. And Stephen King will say it's about perspiration, it's not
Right.
inspiration. And so I don't know, but if you have talent and you have drive, and that's where the people who are successful make it. I think it's the people who believe it's their work ethic and not their talent, whether or not they have immense talent.
Yeah, and I think you just answered the question in the fact that, like, if your dad was a different guy, if your dad said, "Well, I gotta go, show these boneheads out in the shop how this works," but that wasn't him. So he had to have that before going in, and he didn't develop it. That was just part of him.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was for him, I think it was just about, I think he respected people's work. Like, I think he respected that person who, I mean, he knew the chain, right? When you're constructing something, like, just take anything, no one person builds the house, right? You got to have the concrete guy, the framer, the all that. Like, those people don't create without someone able to translate the plan, right? That's in everything. That's kind of the way it works. And I think my dad just respected labor enough to say, like, whether or not I've earned the privilege to to sit at that desk, like those guys can't do their work unless somebody gives them,
Mhm.
helps them do it. And so I think that's seeing that happen. It's like I think that's what I bring to as I'm building this a business and thinking about I want, I eventually want to create this like network of writers that work with me that I can give good assignments to or good work to that like I want to be I want to replicate that because I think that there's value in like creating work for
Mhm.
everybody. And that's where we go back to that whole like this is tough for if you have a book that you want written, a screenplay, an essay, story, whatever that piece of content, whatever that piece of content is. I don't like the content word, so I
Mm.
almost balked at using it. But like if you have something you want to create, that's a leap of faith, right? And so I think everybody is guessing as they go. And I think if you can give some assurances to those people who are hoping and guessing that you're the right person and hoping and guessing that you have the plan, there's a lot of value in that. And there's a lot of people in this business that are going to try to soak that person for more money than it's worth. And they're going to soak
Amen.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're going to take their hope with them. And I don't think you get to do that.
And you and I have talked a lot about this, and I've shared with you that there are some very successful groups out there that are doing it the opposite. They put the business ahead, and they can also write. And
Yep.
there, yeah, and some of them are big, very very big.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
you're doing it a little differently. Hey, the when you're at the bar, when you're talking, when you're sitting at the bar, and someone says, "What do you do?" How does that conversation? When you say, first of all, how do you answer, what do you do for a living? And then what's the average reaction?
That's funny because, I came from social work
Hmm.
into this. I moonlighted as a writer for about 5 years of social work, and I would get up at 5 in the morning and then I'd write until 9 in the morning. Then I'd go to my desk job. And then once I had a kid, I just realized I couldn't. Well, once a kid was getting closer, I was like, I can't do that. That's just not going to work. So I have to make the writing part work. But even for a few years after making the transition, I was still working sort of very, very part time in the social work world. And when people would ask, I would always say, I'm a social worker. My wife
Mm,
would say, like, why do you tell people that? And I said, because I didn't really have this fully formed idea of what I did. And I don't know when that changed. There's no like epiphany light pop moment that where it happened, but I just started answering writer. And usually the response well, there's one of two responses. One, people are interested and they want to know how it works. They want to know the nuts and bolts, right? They'll say like, "Oh, wow, like so you write other people's stories and okay, so you write your own stories and other people's stories and how did they really just want to break it
mm,
down
mhm.
because and other people just look at you like you're kind of crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and then the conversation will change.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I mean. Like the
yeah,
conversation changes, suddenly they get really interested in their half-eaten patty melt and
yeah.
they're not really engaged
Right,
anymore. And those
right,
are the people that have this sort of mythic idea of what I'm doing in here. They think it's something they think that puts me in a bubble and I'm trying to what I want people to understand is like actually like the fact that we're sitting here, we're in the same bubble. Like
right,
I think there's also like a person that reacts like, you're not going to put me in a story, are you? There's that immediate, like, you're not going to use me, are you? And
right, right,
I
right.
laugh at that one. I always laugh at that one.
What's interesting is when I was first published 20 years ago, and it was before, I'm not bashing self-publishing, but it was before self-publishing.
Right.
So when you're in a conversation like that and you say I've written a book, or I've published a book, or I had a book published, um, everyone knew what that meant. They
Right.
they
Oh,
knew what
yeah.
that meant. The reaction was, when you contacted, reporters, hey, I'm a local guy and I just had a book published. Oh, when can I talk to you? Now I think, and I'm not blaming self-publishing, but now there's so much out there that you don't know. We used to know, what do you do? I build boats. Oh, you build boats. That's interesting. I
Right.
know exactly
Right.
what you do. What do you do? I'm a writer. That can mean 1,000 different things. You could be
Yep.
a
Yep.
technical writer. You could be a self-published writer. You could be a scientific writer. You could be a journalist. You could be, it could be 1,000. So it's gotta be a large percentage are like, I have no idea what this was. I'm just leaving it alone and go back to the patty mill.
Right. Right. I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I mean that's a funny topic in and of itself. Like I've been doing the conference thing since 2005, and the conference, my home conference, the Willamette Writers Conference in 2005, there was nothing. They did not want to touch self-publishing.
Hmm.
And I think part of it was because they made a lot of the what the organization made financially was through selling pitches. So that idea that like you can self-publish a book went against the you need to
Mm,
spend $20 a
interesting.
pitch. And I'm not blaming them for that. I mean, the organizations have to stay alive, and that's a challenge unto itself. I don't understand. But now you go to these conferences, and self-publishing is 40 to 50% of the conference um, you know classes are self-publishing. And I think that's confusing to writers too, because they walk in, you've got your manuscript, and you could go to 10 seminars, five, and again, you got a boat sinking, and there's two boats, there's two life rafts. You get and they don't know which one. Like the traditional publishing route is what it is, and the self-publishing route is what it is, and both sides will tell you the other one is, well, yeah, it's muddy. You just don't
Hmm.
like, nobody knows anymore. And so I think it's kind of like music, right? Like before, people recorded in their garages. If you said you were in a band, then you must be on the radio. Now everybody's in a band, so what does that mean? Like,
Right.
so,
Yeah, it's
but I think
the
it's
exact same reaction. You're right. Yeah.
yeah. But I think I have a belief that I don't know. We could talk about self-publishing forever. I think that it's the same thing, right? Like you have to, most self-published authors are in the similar boat. They put something out, they think the brilliance of their book is going to, I run into this all the time. I'm going to price my book at 9.99 because it's brilliant. Nobody's writing sci-fi like me. I'm sorry. It's just
Right.
like, yeah, I'm sorry. You have to earn the right for a 9.99 Kindle
Right.
book. You just don't get it. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the same challenge comes up for them too. They come up for everyone.
Do you get, I don't, I don't want to bounce around here, but I love talking to you and you could just throw some things out here. Do you get often someone going, "Oh, I've got this book and it's Catcher in the Rye." Think of modern Catcher in the Rye. Well, why do I need you? I already have Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
Or I've got this great idea, or the combination of it's Die Hard and Pretty Woman. Well, we've got Die Hard, we've got Pretty Woman. Do
Right,
you
right.
do you get a lot of like concept ideas? Does that have a big play in what you do?
Now, not to like talk about how sausage is made, but I could switch over here to my email on my computer screen and count the number of those that I have in
Get
my email
out.
box. There's got to be three right now where the idea is this, like, it's this meets this. It's another one of these.
How do you
It's
respond to those?
um with varying degrees of enthusiasm. And when I say varying, I mean from none to all.
Right.
Sometimes, if look, there is Harry Potter was something met something in a meeting before any one of us knew
Right. Right.
Hogwarts, and then it became a thing. Then now it's
Right.
Harry Potter meets something else. So you can't entirely poo-poo it, because yeah, Jaws in space wasn't, that's aliens. Nobody knew what that was
Right.
until it was. So I don't entirely dismiss the comparison thing. I tend to be skeptical of it, because I think what most non-professional or non-seasoned writers, and I'm not going to say amateurs, I think just non-seasoned writers, don't understand that that has to really be true to work. You
Mm.
can't just say, because Die Hard was an action movie and Pretty Woman was a rom-com, that because there's a love story in your Tower Heist story, that it's the two. And I think that it's just that it speaks to a cliche. Isn't that from, like, that's from The Player with like Tim Robbins? That's a big joke in that movie. And like, it is right and it's entirely wrong at the same time. So I tend to just I try to bypass it. And what I do with people is I talk about tropes. I go, right, if someone peers to at least know the content that's out there in the world, I tend to dive into, okay, this is, let's not call it Cabin in the Woods. It's a haunted house story. And in haunted house stories, this is what tends to happen. I talk about tropes. I talk about reader expectations or viewer expectations around those tropes. And I talk about your role as a writer in relation to those tropes. Are you going to master what that trope's expectations are and just do it in the most badass way you can? Great. Are you going to subvert those expectations? Like, what are we going to do? I try to move that because I can't actionably write Pretty Woman Meets Die Hard, although I'm
Mm,
going to spend the rest of the day thinking about it.
right.
I can like create a story that subverts the expectation of an action film with a rom-com. I can think in those terms, and the best clients are the ones that can think along with that because they're going to need to communicate expectations to me, right? They're going to need to be the one that says, this isn't as much like that, or what I like about ghost stories is, and this isn't that. So yeah, I need to get it down to an actionable thing, and that's, yeah, what's the trope here, and what are we doing with it?
When you take on something like that, so let's say you're talking to a client, the same example. We'll use Die Hard, Pretty Woman, and moves on. It's going on. It's moving. It's is it moving because the writer is listening and being amiable to your suggestions and working hard? Is it going on because of their immense talent, or is it a combination? Is it because I tend to think it's more when you say, "Hey," I mean, I have a publisher that says that there are many books that she had wanted that she made offers on. She said, "This is good. It needs a lot of work. We're going to have to change this character, and they said, "I don't want to change anything.
Hmm.
I don't want to change." They turned down a publisher's offer because they didn't want to make those changes. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's usually where. So I'm going to start tracking this because this is a question that a lot of like writers and industry professionals that I talk to want to know. Like, where do things fall apart? Um, and I think you and I had this conversation a while back. I had a sci-fi client that was on the line, and I went further into it than I probably should have. I sort of regret doing as much pre-work for him as I did. Um, because I thought I could write the book. I won't do that again. But the question of where things fall apart is usually when in fiction or screenwriting, I guess that's fiction, whether it's, cinema or on the page, it's when they're challenged with the idea of altering something about the story. Like, here's an example, right? I'm safe to talk about this example. I worked on a script probably 15 years ago. It was about an NBA player, kind of at the end of the bench, a guy that's, not in struggling to keep his career alive, and he falls in love with a halftime performer, this acrobat, right? Who he sees, he keeps seeing this performer at halftime at different games, and they fall in love, and it's kind of their different paths. And it was kind of a love and basketball story, right? It was really, it was really good. But the feedback came, we want to do this, except instead of an NBA player with a female acrobat, it would be the other way around. It's a WNBA player with a male acrobat. Dynamics are a little different. It changes the story It changes the story fundamentals the same similar beats, right? The meat, the all
Mhm.
the things you get, the tropes of a romance story. It's just they're played differently because of the roles. And that story got pretty far because the writer accepted the, all right, I get it. I get it. We've seen Love and Basketball from this point of view. Now we're going to get Love and Basketball from that point of view. But that's the rare case of like someone hearing that fundamental feedback and running with it, like, oh, okay, I get it. If you're the industry expert, you know what's out there. Um,
Why is
yeah.
that? Why? I mean, when I get edits back, I get excited. Oh my gosh, you
Oh,
caught
I love
that?
it.
Oh, that's great. Holy cow, how did I miss that? I get excited, why is that? Why does is there so much pushback? Because you're saying the majority of people do.
The majority of people would probably take that advice and say, nope.
No.
I think it goes back to that ego. Like my idea is genius. Genius is that's the fun. I think that's the fundamental flaw, right? I mean, if that side of the boat sinks, it's because I think 9 out of those 10 writers think that their idea is their salvation. Like the
Right.
preciousness of this idea. It is the one idea I'm gonna have.
Right.
It's brilliant. It's
Right.
perfect in itself. It's like, the moment
You need to sign an
the
NDA just to think about my idea because you're going to steal it. It's
right,
so
because
good.
I encounter that every day. Every time I talk to a new client, they're like, "Are you going to steal my idea?" And I this is the hardest thing to sort of bring people down from, but like ideas are cheap. They are apples on a tree and it's September. They're there for the picking. If you truly believe that your one singular idea is precious and you haven't, shaken the tree yet, then you're not going to go anywhere. Because
Right.
I don't know much about J.K. Rowling's story. It's just the easiest example. I'll bet you she shook the tree a little bit. And
Hmm.
Harry Potter didn't come out fully formed. There
Right.
were other iterations of that story that eventually became that. And she shook it until she found the right one. She was in the right time. She hit it. Um, but I think there's this idea that like this is the one idea I'm going to have, and this is the only thing. And if I change it, then it's like this bastardized version of my idea
Mm,
rather than I never thought of it that way. Right? It's like arguing with your spouse, right? Like if you're just going to hold down that you're right all the time, you're not going to be married for very long.
right.
If you're going to argue with your kid, you're always right. Kid's going to hate you. You just have to always be. You have to have faith that the ideas are plentiful. The execution is what's rare, and that's what that's the second gear for most writers don't see.
So are you so in your experience, you're saying the majority, you're saying there should be X number, twice as many more books out there, self-published traditional books out there than there are because these writers can't get past that. They cannot say, no, my idea is perfect. You've just changed it to basketball, to women's basketball. That changes everything. I'm not doing it. So whatever the percentage is, 20%, 50%, I mean, it's significant from what you're
Yeah, I think
saying.
it's a huge number of people. Yeah.
Wow.
I think that the best books, I said this to a client. I've had a really great success story with a recent editing client. I mean, we went through 3 rounds of edits on her book. We changed it fundamentally. She took, and this is not me stroking my ego, but like she took my advice. She pushed back on certain things. I don't want to do that. I don't like that. But a majority of it, we compromised on the editorial feedback I gave. She came out with a book that got her a deal, and not only got her that sold that book as a standalone, she just sold a 3-book series to a medium-sized publisher. And it's the malleability of the idea that, and I read the I think 11th version of the novel that I started with, and it's hard to believe it's the same book. It's
Mm,
really it's superior than from when I handed it off. She took those edits with enthusiasm, stood by what she wouldn't change, and trusted the people she was working with. And it's a better book. It's on the shelf. It's on my shelf somewhere because of that reason. I think the best books aren't like if there's a million great books out there, there's a million that died because the author
right.
simply believed that the genius of their own idea was what they should follow versus that genius moment is the starting point. It's just the beginning. It's the start gun in the race, and then after that, you've got to figure it out.
And I never got that. I never understood why there's such resistance to you both want the same thing. You want to make it better. Why is making it better giving in? Why do I have to negotiate? I did plays for years and we would, have a base script and you get people involved and they go, "Hey, can this character do this? Ooh, that's great. Wait, can this what about if this great?" When you get to the end, you don't go, "Well, only 62% of that is actually mine." That was it. No, you don't care because you're just trying to get there.
Right. Right. I mean, I think I think there's another issue that a lot of writers encounter, and that is like, what is there? When you say getting there, Everett, like what are you talking about? And I think
Right.
a lot of writers don't know what that is outside of validation of that initial idea. And if that's what you're holding out for, then I mean, you're going to be on the other side of that boat. You're not going to make it as a writer, even as a contract writer, even as a ghostwriter. Like you're not I can't go in and tell my client, like, nope, this is your book. This is the
Right.
only thing. Like, we have to have a rapport and some pushback, and there has to be uncomfortable moments, and there has to be, you know, Eric, you heard me, but didn't quite. Let's do this again. It's just, yeah, I don't understand it either because for me, like I said, it's a blue collar job, and and the product isn't done until it works, and you have to accept that it needs tinkering. I mean, the car you drive is not the first design that the designer had. It went through a thousand iterations for
And
safety
it's,
and
I
efficiency.
mean, we could tear this apart. Because I don't know the answer, but
No,
I'm fascinated with the fact that there are people out there that that you publisher or you agent or you, ghostwriter or you writer, I'd rather put it back in the drawer than have you, change his name or do this or move the town. I would rather have it in the drawer than to have you. And that's, I never, because I think you just said it. What is there to them? To them, there is in the pure, in this form, I'll give it to you if you don't change anything. That's what there means. Well, that's not there because it's not ready. It hasn't cooked yet.
right,
And it
right,
cooks with people that want the same thing as you, people that are on your team, people that want the exact same thing that you want.
right, right. I agree. Yeah. I think that again, like I think there's this it's mythology. I think there's this mythology of genius, this mythology of the creative person like sitting somewhere and and it's the way they're depicted in movies. It's the way the way creative people are just the story is told. The way, like in fifth grade, like the kids one kid goes into shop and the other kid goes into AP English and then they're suddenly in this different place. Like suddenly this idea that they're different people that don't relate to each other starts, right? Well, I always think of that Stand By Me, right? One of my favorite books and movies ever. Like the book is amazing if you've never read it. But like there's the two main characters are sort of at that divide in their lives where they say like you're going to go to AP and I'm going to go to shop and there's this like struggle for like are they
Mm.
going to stay friends because of that divide and I think it just makes me it makes me realize that that's probably culturally what happens. Like there's this above the line, below the line thing that we create, and then anybody up there who's making something is somehow a genius, and the people down there are not. And that's just there's no up there or down there. That's just that line is not there. It's just silly to think of it being there.
And I'll go even as far as to say that genius is from that individual having the belief in his partners and his editors and his agents and
Yeah,
his producers, having the belief in, oh, I didn't catch that, or oh, you're right, or let's try it, or let's do this. That's part of the genius. That's when you get here. Because the irony is when you have that and you have an Eric and you've got, this person, this person, this person, when it comes out the other end, it still has your name on it. So
yeah,
you still
yeah,
get to be, you had all the input with these people to create something that they believe is better because they want the same thing you do, but it still has your name on it. But
yeah,
I cannot, it's just fascinating to me that there's such resistance in that they're in instead of I mean, if when you go to get your taxes done and the guy goes, you need to do this. No, 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 no. I don't want to take that
yeah.
deduction.
Right, right.
No, because when
No
I filled
way.
it out, I didn't take that. You never do that. But
No, you
you
wouldn't
do it in this sort of thing.
because we don't put taxes on this like pedestal of being, we look at taxes as kind of a what are the taxes a result of? Just somebody churning
Right.
away. We have this idea of a blue collar thing. It's an accountant. Whereas like, there's a white tablet and I've got a pen that glows and I wear a white robe when I stand at it and like
Right.
I just plug this idea that I've got just it gets I don't know
Yeah.
it's nonsense. The One of my favorite recent quotes is Joe Mazzulla, coach of the Boston Celtics, said the two worst words in the English language are good job. And
Mm,
that's coach speak, a lot of coaches like kind of make their brand around, you know, not being satisfied. But when I heard that, I thought I need to bring that to some client meetings, especially ones where we're in that process, because you know, it's it's not done. Draft
Right.
one, not done, right?
Yeah.
Good job on draft one, but draft two is the better job, and draft three is even better, and draft four is the one that gets noticed, and draft five is the one that gets published. I mean, that's the reality. You have to idealize the work. I think that's the missing piece. And I wish I knew how to translate that in an education, or like a kind of a cultural sense. Because if we learned as people to idealize the work instead of the results,
Mm.
I think there would be a lot more equity in the world. I mean, frankly, not to be like so pie in the sky, but like, I don't know, we just look at the results, like that's the thing.
And I think what's interesting, and it's probably part of the reason that you've been doing this successfully so long, is there's a commercial advantage, financial advantage for you to go, hey, first draft, great. Thanks so much. Your check cleared.
Yep,
Sayonara. Good
yep,
job. Good job.
yep.
I mean, and then get to the next one. But you are a partner. You want it to get to second. You want to get to second. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. That's got to be a big part on why you've been doing this for so long, because there's so many guys out there, I guarantee you, that would do that first draft and would get the good job stamp. Boom, there you go,
And you're done.
and you're done.
Yep. And you don't care about one of the hard, you talked about hard days, and I answered the question and then immediately thought of this as we moved on. One of the worst days is, I always include in every contract a rewrite. It's what I do. And a lot of my fellows don't do that. And I think we can talk about that for a while. We could pick that apart. But I think one of the hardest days for me is when I hand in that first draft and say, okay, I'm going to step back for a couple of weeks, and you're going to be happy with me, mad at me, you're going to agree with me, disagree with me, you're going to curse me on your dog walk, but we're going to take all of that energy on that I put into the first draft, and then come up with a better second draft. The hardest days are when I get back the notes for the second draft, and it's like the person didn't do that. That's really,
Mm.
really hard. That it's hard to know that, because that's the thing I can't do. I cannot tell you what you like and don't like and need and don't need to see in that next draft. I can recommend, and I do. I'll say, look, this is my first draft. I felt really good about this part we're going to have to talk about. I'm really open with people about it. But I can't tell you the other stuff. I can't tell you what you see. And sometimes I get that, however much coaching I do, I'll get back that first draft and say, wow, they want me to change a character name and, you know, give guy a beard, and that's it. It's
Right, right, right.
it's less work, and so it's better money, but I push back. Now I've started to push back. Like, no, there's got to be more. We cannot leave it at this, because it's not done.
Right.
What are actionable things that we can do?
You know what's interesting, as you were talking, I have a project that comes out in a couple of months, and went through many of the publishers, editors, and for the first time there was an editor that was actually me. I mean,
Mm.
she was, and instead of saying, "Hey, we're going to want to clarify this person would go, "What the hell are you talking about?" And would just be like, and I'm going, but
That's
we're
hard.
so used to that hand holding. Wow, great, great line. We're so used to that. There were things there. This lady wrote, "I thought you could write. Why are you doing?" And I'm going, "Oh my gosh!" She was saying the same thing that anyone else would say.
Right.
She just said it in a mean way.
Yeah.
But we're so used to that. Great job on this. If we can make this one as good as this over here, then instead of saying, "I thought you could write. Why? What is this crap? What is this?"
No.
And it just been doing this a while. I have a very thick skin, but I was like, "Oh my gosh, did you see the?" And it really, it was so new to me, and it was so that I really started to question, maybe I can't do this, maybe I can't do that.
Right.
But because we don't get our teeth kicked in enough, where when you do, it's such a shock.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, having that thick skin, how you get feedback and how you give feedback is challenging. I mean, even as the writer, I get that from my clients sometimes, where they just like, when I say, like, you're going to get mad at me, like, that comes from experience. I mean, I've had some really, really mad people. I have numerous like chill out devices in this office that my wife has bought me because I'll take so much abuse. I've got the little singing bowl that you ding it and it gives you the chime. Like I've got all these little things that can keep me calm. Um, Now I just kind of it's just part of the business. The skin is thicker, but yeah, how you get feedback and what you do with it. Like you talk about partnerships. As a younger you probably would not have felt, you might have backed off. You might have, struggled. You might have resented those edits. I always put everything in a we thing. Like, and I always, here's what I do. All right. When it comes to giving people any kind of editorial feedback, I give them I use this your ideal reader. And that's a big part of our early
Mm.
conversation. Who is your ideal reader? Where are they a person sitting on the bus who's got 10 minutes to kill between stops? They're going to work, so they need to pick me up. Are they someone who, is going to sink into a chair on a rainy Saturday and read a whole book? Who are they? And so when I give people feedback, it's like your ideal reader doesn't identify with this moment. Your ideal reader needs more here. Because I hope that orients people toward this idea that I'm not your ideal reader as your ghostwriter or development editor. You are not your own ideal reader. Everyone is not your ideal reader. I love that one. Who's the ideal reader for this book? Everyone.
Everyone. Yeah.
Mm, mm, nope. Your ideal reader is somebody specific. You have to talk to them, and if I think that helps orient people towards making improvements, right? Your person who's
Right.
sitting in that chair for 4 hours on a Saturday reading who's going to polish off a book has a different expectation than that person who's got 10 minutes between bus stops. You have to write to them differently. You have to give them each what they need. This is shorter chapters. This might be long, immersive description. That's a difference in in what we're doing. And so
Right.
I just try to orient people towards it's not making me happy, it's not making you happy, it's not making your family happy because they've given you time to write. It's making that reader happy because that's the person that's going to buy the book. That's the person that's going to tell their friends about the book and on and on and on. And that's how you have success, I think.
When I'm gonna get the numbers wrong, but there was a study years ago through one of the major universities, and it went in the 1990s, and it took a poll of how many people had not read one book that year, and it was about, I'm gonna get it wrong, let's say 9%, 10% of the people polled had not. Then they did it in like 2015, 2017, and it was like 25% had not read one book a year. But there are now more with self-publishing books available than ever before. I mean, it used to be 1 to 10 for every 10 traditionally published books, there are one self-published book. That's flipped. Now there's 10,
Yeah.
now it's 10 to 1.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are statistically less people reading books than ever before, but there are more books than there have been in years. You're obviously busy. There are more people that want to write books, but according to the statistics, there are less people reading books. What does that mean?
Right. Well, I mean, I just got like I think of my son, who's a reader, who has taken numerous books off my shelves to go read, and I trust that he's a future customer
Mm,
for an author.
mm.
But I look at his play group, and over the weekend there'll be 10 kids that come in and out of our house, and maybe three of them are actively reading a book independently, and the other four, I don't know. The other five or six, I don't know. Um, it's they're only reading it because it's part of their education, right?
Right.
Like it's they're being told by their parents when they get off on their own. I think it's an uphill battle, honestly. I think it's an uphill battle. I think if you and I have this conversation in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, like it's that statistic only probably deteriorates. But I think what it means is that the book has to be better, right? Like there's more books and fewer readers. That means there's more noise. You have to have a better product. And I mean, this sort of flies in the face of like, people that change the genre or push the tropes or like, you know, disrupt what we write, like the expectations of what we write. But you have to give the reader what they want. Because if somebody's going to read 6 books, let's say somebody reads 6 books a year, that's a book every 2 months. Um, and they want to read a cozy mystery that takes place in Scotland in 1700 and it deals with dukes and duchesses or whatever, you have to give that to them. You have to give them what they want. So you it's again knowing your reader, knowing what you're trying to do and showing up for them. The challenge is different. I mean, the same challenge might have been 100 years ago when fewer people could read. I mean, that it might have been the same similar statistics, right?
Mhm.
Because fewer people were literate. I don't know. I think the readers are out there. I think they're always going to be out there. I think we might make up for some of that with like internationally, like books, people wanting to read things from other countries. So there's instead of just your audience being in the United States and Canada, there might be just more people in the rest of the world that are interested in your books. I think I don't think it's as dire as like nobody reads. I just think you have to be open-minded to where the readers are and agreeable to what they want and and accept the fact that maybe commerce has a part of it too. Like I know Kindle Vella failed because they're pulling it off the shelves, but
Mm.
that the rest of the world reads episodic 1,000 word content
Right.
voraciously. That's a huge in China and Asia. It's a huge thing, and it hasn't reached the American market. Maybe because the market doesn't want to sell you a 50-cent token for a short story. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to make the novel more relevant. But I just think like meeting readers where they are, both in tropes and in the market, is key, right?
I love talking to you. I'm cognizant of the clock. I know you got a busy day, so I'm going to end this, but I want to say thanks for talking to us.
Oh my
You
gosh, my pleasure.
I have an enormous amount of respect and for what you do and the fact you're doing, and I want you to succeed because you're the guy. When I have bad days, I'm going, man, look at Eric. Eric is doing this, and you've got a great balance. You've got a great work-life balance, and you're doing what you love. And I just think that's phenomenal, and I wanted to celebrate that with you.
Well, thank you. I think that it's hard to see the forest for the trees sometimes, and so these kind of conversations, you know, it's never going to get easy, but
Yeah.
it's never going to be easy. It's not going to get easier, but I think that like knowing you're on a right track like makes the struggle feel real, and to know that it resonates with you. I mean, I have an immense respect for you as well. Like I think that our conversations have been incredibly valuable to me and definitely reorient me on some of those bad days. So, um, yeah, back at you.